Welcome to the Longevity CEO podcast, where we dive into the science of living healthier, longer lives, share real-time stories of resilience, and discover actionable strategies to help you lead with impact and purpose. Because being the CEO of your health and longevity starts today. Welcome to the Longevity CEO. I am your host, Greg Schindler. Today's guest, Stephanie Dainow, is the Executive Director of lifespan.io and the Chief Business Officer of SENS Research Foundation. Stephanie and I have met in some networking groups over the last year or so. She has a fascinating role, or fascinating roles, I should say, has a lot of background in this. I'm excited for her to tell her story, what drives her to be in this industry around healthspan and lifespan, and hear more about some of the exciting things that are going on in her world. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Greg. And honestly, from the day that we met, I think it was pretty obvious that there was alignment in terms of how we thought and what we wanted to see as it relates to not only the industry, but the public at large. And it's a really significant topic that deserves this kind of conversation. So I appreciate you even hosting this podcast and having me on it.
No, thank you so much. You're 100%. Yeah, the minute we met, it was clear there was alignment, and you're a force in any room that you're in. You're incredibly bright and articulate and experienced in the world of longevity. I guess we'll use a big umbrella term for now in that space. But it was really immediately apparent, and I was like, I need to know this person, right? So I'm super happy that you agreed to come on and do this, and I think it's going to be really interesting for people who are interested in our world, in our space.
Amazing. Well, there's plenty of exciting things to talk about today, so I'm ready.
Let's start with you. I know everybody, tell us a little bit about you. How'd you get here? What drives you? Give us the Stephanie Dainow origin story, if you will, and, a little, some of the journey and the paths along the way.
Okay. So born and raised in New York City. My father was born in 1936, and he had heart disease and heart attack in his early 50s. And I was born when he was in his mid 50s, and I have a younger sister. So essentially, what I've realized over the last decade or so is that I grew up with a parent that was, from the moment I kind of became, pause. My father was born in 1936. He had me in his 50s after he already had heart disease and a heart attack. And so what that meant was that I grew up with a parent, an older parent, that was on a consistent decline. I didn't get to see this gentleman that had just a excitement for life. He didn't take trips because he was afraid to be too far from his cardiologist, always paranoid that it was the end. And this is what I witnessed, right? The suffering associated with an age-related disease. So I'll come back to him in a little bit, but that was the first catalyst that kind of drove me here. Growing up in New York, very, very business heavy. You really have to understand how to make it in tough environments. When I was in high school, I wanted to get into entertainment because I thought that celebrities were able to influence positive social change. And so I ended up doing that for a while. I worked in a celebrity marketing firm. I worked with big brands at a media holding company. But what I realized also was that what it came down to was putting products in front of people's faces. So the takeaway is incentive structures and how the economy and our society works. People have a bottom line, and sometimes that gets in the way of, what the passion focused cause is that they're really representing and spending all their time trying to get behind and push forward. And so I realized I needed to make a shift. I was doing marketing, I was doing business development, I was doing operations, all sorts of stuff. But in high school, I had also realized that there was a gentleman named Ray Kurzweil who existed. And Ray is a futurist, and he came up with this very, very comprehensive notion that technology will transcend biology, right? And what are the implications of that? And for what it's worth, during high school and college and my time in New York as an early professional, it wasn't really a widely accepted consideration, right? People wanted you to go up a ladder and follow a playbook and just iterate and do better with the playbook. But what Ray Kurzweil is saying is that there are deep tech opportunities that can really positively impact society and our future, but it requires you to create your own playbook, which is a completely different mindset that exists heavily in Silicon Valley, but maybe not so much in New York. And I'm going back like 10 years, right? So eventually I said, all right, I need to change careers altogether. I ended up getting my dream job at Singularity University, which Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis started. And my job was to go to executives and board members of Fortune 100 companies and say, look, you're concerned about your playbook and these competitors that exist, but what if we told you that the future is going to look completely different with not only the acceleration, but also the convergence of exponential technologies like big data, AI, quantum computing, synthetic biology. And so I was supposed to go to these leaders and basically express what the future would look like and how it would be a compromise for their projected success. So here's a crazy example. It's really, really basic. But let's say, Greg, you are the CEO of Red Bull, and this is 10 years ago, right? My job is to come to you and say, listen, Greg, you're concerned about Monster and all those other energy beverage companies. What if I told you your industry and your business is going to be disrupted by a completely different industry that you're not paying any attention to, like Tesla? And then the idea is, well, how does that even fit? And why am I thinking about this? So imagine that the majority of market share for Red Bull purchases happens at gas stations. And now you have the introduction of electric vehicles that don't require you to be at a gas station, and self-driving technology that doesn't require you to pull over to get an energy drink, which is what they're banking on in order to hit their bottom line. So you have to rethink how society and our behaviors are going to shift because of the introduction of these new technologies. And so then on behalf of Singularity University, we would bring in experts to talk about what these technologies would look like and how to modify your business model so that you could actually maintain brand relevance, help society, and also have a new stream of revenue. And at the end of the day, what you're really doing is trying to future-proof your business from becoming Kodak or Blockbuster. So that was kind of the focus there.
How did that conversation go? I mean, how was it received when you walked in and started, launching these ideas that you could be disrupted by something you have no idea that's coming?
So it's mixed because, again, if you've spent the last several decades of your career going up a ladder based on a specific way of society and economics functioning, one, it's scary. Two, it's overwhelming. Three, you really think, like, if I'm the CEO now and I'm only going to be doing this a few more years, what's my legacy? Does it mean I want to upend everything? Also, you have to get board buy-in. You have to kind of integrate everyone from the top down in your chain of command. It's very difficult, but Singularity University was known for shock and awe, right? So the idea is to get them to react enough such that they start thinking differently. It's thought-provoking so that you're even open to considering something else. And at the end of the day, SU, Singularity had a great reputation. Peter Diamandis, Ray Kurzweil. So people were scared, but eager and open. And I think it was, yeah.
No, I love that. Being an Abundance 360 member, I've been able to go and sit in the room and listen to Peter and Ray have a conversation, as well as all the other people Peter has access to, Peter and Ray, right? And who they can put in the room. And once you hear it and learn it, and I don't even want to go be so, you can't unsee it. And I don't want to be so bold as to say, understand it, because when they get in there and start talking quantum and what's going to happen there, I arguably had to go home and get on Google and ChatGPT and start really kind of doing some research to understand what I just heard. But I do know this much. They are futurist, as you said. That's where thinking has to happen. And innovation, what's the saying? Every crazy idea is crazy the day before the breakthrough. Yes. That's where innovation happens. And I even talk about aging in that way, where I say, people said, well, aging is a disease. And that's not a new argument or debate. It's been a couple of 100 years people have been talking about this. But I say, whether you think it is or it isn't, doesn't really matter. It's the people who do start thinking about it as a disease. Their minds go, well, maybe it can be cured, or maybe it can be reversed, or maybe it can be mitigated or slowed, or the progression. That's
Maybe it's
where
an engineering problem.
yeah, then it's exactly. And that's where breakthroughs happen. That's where we just need some of the bright minds to go, well, let me think about this from a different way. Right. And I love the way you describe SU with, shock and awe, because sometimes that's what takes it to get people to wake up and say, I may be thinking about this, maybe not wrong, but maybe I could think about this differently.
Because you don't know what you don't know. That's the idea here.
And I
Yeah.
think in the longevity world too, when you and I are in these rooms and, we're talking to people and people come up and say, well, what do you think about this? Can we live this long, or we do whatever? My answer is, I don't know, but I would say be curious. Stay curious, stay open-minded, because things are moving really, really quickly right now. And we don't know what the next 5 or 10 years are going to look like, but I'm pretty optimistic with some of the things that we see on the horizon.
Yeah. And so going back to the journey while I was there doing this work, my clients were all the verticals. However, the ones that really fascinated me, the idea of, how insurance industry is going to be completely overhauled is fascinating. But I really was drawn to aerospace development and also longevity biotech and health. And so I started meeting all these deep tech entrepreneurs in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And what I found was a pattern. A lot of them come out of academia and they go to the VC and they say, hey, I'm going to save the world, invest in me. And unfortunately, in academia, it's kind of a traditional model such that they're not educated on business acumen, right? And so what they don't know is that the VC gets a billion ideas a day. At the end of the day, what is going to help them hit their goals? And so it has to be framed in a way that meets their needs as well. So I started privately consulting some of these entrepreneurs on business strategy, communication, board, board plans, all sorts of stuff. And one of them asked me to co-found a startup that was leveraging all of this exciting technology that SU Singularity was talking about, like machine learning and AI, robotics, automation. And effectively, the company was a drug discovery and drug development startup. And we were targeting age-related diseases. And so all of a sudden, my worlds kind of collided, because I've never liked the idea of aging, but specifically in the context of the decline and the suffering. Okay. I want to just point out, and this is very important, the word longevity does not have a consensus on definition.
Right.
Right. If I tell somebody, oh, I work in longevity, oftentimes they say, oh, you're in aesthetics, you do Botox.
Right.
No. Or oh, no.
Skin cream.
Are you one of those transhumanists that want to upload your mind? And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with either one. But what you see is that there are misconceptions and cognitive biases immediately. And the reality of the situation is longevity can be biohacking, lifestyle, wellness, supplements, therapeutics, deep tech with drugs and, drug discovery, AI components. It could be diagnostic platforms. It could be clinics and mental health. It could be spirituality. So whenever someone talks about longevity, I highly recommend starting the conversation by understanding where the baselines are for each of you, because otherwise the conversation's already started kind of in a convoluted manner. So anyways, going back to the startup, I spent about 3-4 weeks challenging my partner's assumptions about what the business model will be, what the goals are, and here's an interesting idea. She wanted to work on C. elegans, and C. elegans is this microscopic organism that a lot of people use for lifespan studies. And the thing was, decades ago, someone had a big megaphone and popularized it. But the thing was, it didn't mean that there were other model organisms that weren't viable. They just didn't get the amplification as much as C. elegans did. So we ended up changing the organism that we were using to something completely different that made this a novel business model. And within 2 months, we got an offer for investment from one of the top longevity funds. And so what that told me in the moment was, you don't have to be a scientist or a technologist to be able to support this field. You have kind of an outlier capability, which is business acumen and a different way of thinking about things, because you've been in marketing and advertising and all sorts of stuff. And so the imposter syndrome kind of it eased up, right? I can provide value. And that's to say to everyone who's listening, just because you're not a scientist or a politician doesn't mean that you can't really help move this initiative along, whatever it means to you, whether that's wellness or you want a drug or you want to target age-related diseases or you just want to optimize, what vitality feels like today. And so from there, my father was declining, right? He's 80, 81 at that point. And all of a sudden I start getting phone calls and he is in and out of the hospital for 6 months. And what I witnessed was unbelievable. As like a mid-20s, I was the only one responsible for really making decisions. And we didn't have help. The system did not teach us about health insurance or, end of life or, extra care and how you negotiate with insurance. We aren't equipped with the knowledge to be able to manage the decline if you're not already in the healthcare system as an employee and you're young, right? And so I was the only one my age in my friend group going through this, and the decline was awful. It got worse and worse and worse. I've never seen anything like it. And I said to myself, this shouldn't be this way. You shouldn't have to suffer this much, right? And I went to lifespan.io and I said, look, I want to help. And they had me advise their board and team for about 6 months. And then they asked me to join as a board member. A year later, they asked me to step in as executive director as well. And a year after that, I negotiated a merger with my business partner, Lisa Fabini, with SENS Research Foundation. And so these are two nonprofits that are coming together. They're both extremely historic. They have 25 years of experience between them. They were majority responsible for really pioneering this industry, because think about 10 years ago, you say the word longevity, it's considered fringe. Scientists were not able to publicly discuss what they wanted to work on. It's kind of like if you think of cancer, right? It used to be considered a taboo discussion topic, and now it's considered a global priority with a ton of funding. So how did that shift happen? And the model that Lifespan was using was based off of the model that was leveraged to make cancer mainstream. And there's a whole book about it, The Emperor of All Maladies. It's about the history of cancer. And the strategy was media and PR and reframing the situation. And it worked really well. The difference with longevity is that decades ago, if you put a young boy who has cancer on national TV working with, a national baseball team, it gets everyone's attention. Millions of people will watch it. And that's pretty much all they see. Today, if you put something on national TV, you're inundated with media and content every week. So you don't know what to believe. 2, you might not even see it. And 3, it's quite confusing. So the strategy works only so much. And one of the reasons we also wanted to merge was because we wanted to really push forward the research side of things too. So I'll get into what the two organizations represent shortly. And earlier this week, we finalized the merger, and the new organization is now called Lifespan Research Institute. And I can't wait to talk about that. But at the end of the day, this was my trajectory that kind of led to why I am in this industry. I want to reduce the suffering. I want to extend health span. And if you do look at it as an engineering problem, it's just a matter of capabilities, knowledge, good ideas, and determination and funding.
Yeah. I love that. Go. I mean, there's some things I want to say, but you're so on a roll that tell us more about Lifespan Research Foundation, the new entity, the organization, and what the merger of those two means.
So let me ask you, Greg, you had heard of Lifespan.io and SENS Research Foundation before?
Correct.
How did you find out about them? And just when you first learned about them, what was your understanding of their place in this entire movement, quote unquote?
So I had learned about Aubrey de Grey first in this space, right? As a person interested in the whole longevity, the science of longevity space. he's an OG, right? He's one of the guys that was out there up front on the frontier. And so that's what led me into understanding more about the organizations that, he was sort of the tip of the spear on at that time, was through learning more about Aubrey.
So let me give a quick history of the two organizations. So lifespan.io started out as a crowdfunding platform that would give early stage research access to visibility and funding it otherwise wouldn't get. And so we raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for amazing science projects, which then enabled those project leaders to go to venture capitalists and say, this is a de-risked opportunity for you because there's 1,000 people that put up multiple hundred thousands of dollars. There's nothing really to say there. And it was so successful, the company expanded to news. So we've had science writers and journalists and a proper news outlet and team for many years now. And it has been known as like the advocacy and knowledge base for any people who are interested in longevity. The value of news with us is that because it's a nonprofit, there's a very stringent code of ethics. So we don't promote products. You can't pay us to write about you. It is all about the science, the research, and the ethical interpretation of how to actually express that in a news outlet. The idea here is that we have a pulse on the entire industry when there are breakthroughs, if there's momentum and movement. And so having that touch point and really knowing what's going on in different aspects of the field, whether it is diagnostics or epigenetic reprogramming or, telomeres. And so to have one place where all of that information is available was a value prop. The other part, so Lifespan, I'm outlining the 4 different programs that the new organization has. So Lifespan has the news outlet. We've paused on crowdfunding right now. We've evolved. And the second thing is the Longevity Investor Network. And so what that is it's about 300 or 400 qualified longevity investors that range from angels to medium-sized funds. And every startup that you can imagine, again, that goes across diagnostics, clinics, supplements, deep tech therapeutics, you name it. And they come through and they get to pitch. And so if you think about in a bubble, the entire industry we have a touch point. And that is valuable because it's a one-stop shop for anything that you want with a very stringent ethical foundation. The SENS research side is known for its research and academic education. The research has historically been damage repair, right? And so if you think about it, you have billions of cells, and as you're living, they're reproducing, but over time, like a car, there's exhaust, you get exposure to the sun, things start breaking down, and some of the cells become what we call senescent, they're dormant. And they're also secreting toxins, influencing all the healthy cells around it. So you have that element, and you also have the fact that the healthy cells can't even do what they need to do because there's blockage. So then there's compounding effects, age-related disease, right? So what happens if we got rid of that damage over and over again and kind of brought you back to a regenerative state? And so that was the idea that Aubrey had with this damage repair approach to age-related diseases from a biotech and therapeutics perspective. The new organization will be expanding beyond that approach because there are various other ways to think about it. The second part, the education part, you can't learn how to be a longevity scientist in the university setting yet. It's still not a mainstream thing. And so we actually have a hybrid institutional academic program. And so the idea there is, and this is fundamental to what we're going to be talking about in terms of incentive structures and why we have challenges in the industry. In academia, you're incentivized to publish, not necessarily to solve. And there's kind of this cycle where you do research, you publish information, your name gets out there. If it's broad enough and widely distributed, you get a grant for another part of research initiative you're interested in, and you do the same thing over again: research, publish, grant, research, publish, grant. And so, in order to do really innovative things, even at Singularity University, we didn't talk about the singularity theory. We talked about what can you do today and what is the language you can do today. Otherwise, the public or your team is just not ready for it. Your investors can't wrap their heads around what that is. It's kind of like, let's say we're in the 1800s and you're standing next to a horse and buggy, and I tell you, in a couple of decades, we're going to be flying around in metal tubes with wings across the ocean. You can't see it. It's like you're in 1969, we're on the moon, and I tell you, we're going to have these devices that have more computing power than what we just used to get up to the moon. And there's a thing called the internet. It's the same as saying right now, we're going to live forever. We're going to revert. I mean, you just can't see it yet. So the framing and the narrative are really important. You have to understand where everyone is and bring them on the journey with you. So if you go back to the education piece, where people are is that cycle. So we need to have one foot in there, right? The other foot is also going to be in institutional education. So they get exposure to, pseudo pitches, right? How do you understand the business models that are needed? How do you do tech transfer office agreement deals? So getting more of a comprehensive, well-rounded exposure to really go off and do amazing things. And so those are the 4 areas: the news and digital education, the investor network for startups and investors, the internal and external research, and we're partnered with universities across the planet, and then the hybrid, very comprehensive educational programming. So that is the 4 focus areas that we have. And we're going to be doing a lot more, which I can get into. I will pause there because I know I haven't fully answered all the questions, but there's a lot here to share.
No, there's a lot to unpack there, but I love the way you framed it. It's very easy to follow. And just touching a little bit on the cellular senescence and that, that early work and damage repair that Aubrey was focused on. We now know that, it's enemy number 1 to aging people, and people say, well, I don't quite understand it. And you can tell them, that when a cell stops dividing and multiplying, then eventually it becomes senescent and it's harmful in the body and it secretes these toxins. But I've told people too, it's like, you're a healthy person. You're a healthy cell. You're working out, you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're doing breath work and mindfulness. You're just trying to be healthy. And you have a best friend that sits next to you 24/7, is always with you, but he smokes and drinks and eats poorly and doesn't work out and doesn't sleep well and, doesn't do all, and he's trying to influence you to become more like him, right? Every day, right? Like that's a senescent cell in the body. And people go, oh, okay, now I get
Analogy.
it. I mean, it's a very simple one, but if I'm trying to explain it to my next door neighbor or, one of my kids, I'm like, it's useful. And people go, oh, okay. So yeah, we don't want those guys in the body. And a lot of the research and the early work that was done through SENS to understand that, I think, look, the 9 hallmarks of aging were only identified in 2013. There's now 13, I think, hallmarks of aging, but at the time, and cellular senescence is one of them. And that's another thing I think that's important for people to understand. The breakthroughs and the knowledge that we've accumulated from Yamanaka factors, discovered in 2007, won the Nobel Prize in 2012, epigenetic clocks in 2013, 9 hallmarks of aging in 2013, and 2021, the WHO recognizes formally aging as a disease. This is a very compressed time window. This is only in the last decade or so. And we're seeing a lot of this momentum in science that has progressed as a result of a lot of these discoveries and findings, right? And agreement. And I think there's alignment around it, which is really critical. And you said too, there's no university or academic path for being a longevity scientist or a longevity medical doctor, right? Most of the people that are working in longevity as healthcare professionals are learning this, post medical school, right? And they've been siloed. And that's why I think we've seen the explosion in functional or integrative medicine and what can we do to keep the body in a more natural state to repair itself. And that's where things are starting to get back to what can we do to be more proactive and preventative so that suffering you described with your father, I forget the number, Stephanie, you may know it, but I think it's 9 or 11 years, but the average person spends the last 9 or 11 years of their life with some sort of chronic age-related disease, right? I mean, it's just, and if you think about it, that's a pretty good sized chunk of our lives. So when I think of longevity, and you touched on this earlier, Marvin Minsky called AI a suitcase word. He coined this term suitcase word, which just means it's such a big word. It means so many different things to so many different people. And I loved your point. Like, let's get on the baseline of what we're talking about when we say longevity, because it could be skin creams or, senolytics, or it could be a lot of different things. The way I like to think about it is just living healthier longer. And it's an industry, it's a movement, it's a technology, it's a science, it's a lot of different things. And everybody's focused on, collaboratively, we're going to share this knowledge of what we're all focused on. So for me, it's cellular medicine and what can we do from in that field of science to try to help people age healthier. longer. Look, I say this, the definition of aging that I like to use is the functional decline of a living organism over a period of time. It's pretty simple. Everybody can understand it. And we say, we functionally decline in our cognitive abilities, our musculoskeletal system, our immune function, our vascular function, and so on. These big systems functionally decline over this period of time. I'm not as concerned about the period of time part right now. And some people hate it when I say that. I'm more concerned in how do we slow and mitigate, possibly reverse this functional decline? Because if we can start to address those systems, the damage repair, the improvement at the cellular level, and slow that functional decline down as we start to age, then I think we can start talking about the period of time. What do you think about that statement? Do you agree or disagree? Or
Yes. Yes, and so if you're referring to people saying, well, what would I even do if I have 20 more extra years of healthy life, or I want to live forever? Everyone's entitled to their thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts actually influence, people to behave differently. And sometimes that's what leads to amazing leadership and shifts. For the purposes that I have and these organizations, I would also consider this notion that even despite what your ultimate goal is here, the first steps we all have to take have to be the same ones. You still have to understand at a scientific level how aging works, and it's probably one of the most complex systems that we know, and how to create interventions versus, regardless, you can't just make yourself live forever right now. We have research to do, we have development, we have political work, we have learnings that need to be shared, misinformation that needs to be managed, better fundraising tactics. And so if saying that you wanted some radical difference in your future helps motivate you to dig into what this field is trying to do, rock on.
Yeah, 100%. The why drives a lot of things for us, right? If I have a purpose or something that I can attach to a goal or an ambition or whatever, that always helps. Really, where I was going at the heart of that was, and I'm sure you get this too, people come up and people are focused on this number, this age, right? I hear people talking about 130 or 150 or 180 or whatever. My point is, if we can't address the functional decline of this living organism first and foremost and slow it and maybe even reverse it as we're aging, then the period of time part doesn't matter.
Does not matter.
A, nobody's signing up for it, and B, it's probably not going to happen. So I always, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. People come up to you at a conference or at an event, and they say, oh, I'm 17 years younger biologically than my chronological age. And my first question is, that's awesome. What does that mean to you?
And according to which diagnostic test?
And 100%,
and
right?
Which organ, and how effective is that test right now? Because you're probably the beta tester. It's still being iterated.
And I think to your point, that's where the steps we take all have to be the first ones, and that knowledge share or there's a lot of confusion around, a lot of this stuff, right? With aging and biological age and, which epigenetic clock and which organization and how big is their data lake and what is their algorithm and normalization methods and all those different things. And if you start to get into that conversation with a person who just took a biological age test, they're going to glaze over and find the next person to talk to, right? Or, just they want to get away from you as quickly as possible. But I think that education, research, knowledge, and being able to explain these things to people who are interested in understanding more about healthy aging, let's just call it that, that's where it has to start. It has to.
So that's a great transition into, remember, this kind of box or circle of these 4 programs. At the end of the day, if you think about it, okay, they're in this circle, but then what happens beyond it as a result of them? And if I have to kind of distill it to something that's really simplified, if we're putting out white papers, if we're publishing research papers, if we're putting out ethical and responsible news, if we are educating entrepreneurs on how to present to investors, if we're educating investors on how to do better diligence, if you're teaching students how to think outside the box so they can balance between academia and institution, all of this information, that's what it is. It's responsible information. The purpose is to enable better decision making politically, from an investment perspective. Where do you want to spend your time? What kind of research do you want to do? What kind of startup makes sense? Where are people's heads right now? Because at the end of the day, understanding your audience really matters, the communication, which we should definitely dig into. But if you think about, if someone comes up and says, well, I want to live 20 years longer, but there's no mechanism to guarantee that, then what's the purpose of the conversation? Are you trying to make a point? Are you trying to get someone to agree with you? Do you actually want to enact some sort of action, right? So there's a difference between talking in circles just so you feel heard versus, well, I really want to get this moving. And is talking about living 20 more years with this particular individual going to help move the needle? Or do I have to frame it differently, right? And so knowing who you're talking to and what their beliefs are. I've done a whole podcast on this before. Politicians, they have to think about their constituents. They have to think about what's going to keep them in office. If they start saying things that are seemingly radical to the territory that they represent, even if they believe in it, it's not taking them on the journey with you, right? And so it's complicated.
Yeah. That brings up a point, about the headwinds that we face in the traditional medicine model, in the political environment, in the big movements that need to happen for a significant shift in how we approach healthcare in this country. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? It's a dicey subject for sure.
It is. People know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. Change is hard. And let's say, for example, you are religious and you believe that death is natural. Even bringing up this topic likely goes against your ideology and your principles, right? That might be a non-starter. So if you consider that is a variable, that likely changes your approach to how you even discuss it. So that's just one thing to keep in the back of your mind. The way insurance is set up, the way healthcare is set up, the way you're trained to become, a medical practitioner, the incentive structures from academia to publish and not necessarily solve, all of this has created a reality where you're driven by something that is not necessarily a solution, right? It's a means to an end in a different capacity. And I know this is kind of like deep and philosophical, but tangibly, it's probably some of the reasons why we don't have more longevity scientists. The FDA still doesn't recognize aging as a disease. The insurance companies are not yet understanding the longevity economy and the fact that you're going to have more opportunity to generate revenue if you start thinking about people's health at an expanded time frame or timeline. It's being able to unlearn and relearn. It's that shock and awe, and not everyone gets exposure to it. And comfort is not something that's negligible. If you have a CEO that's told your whole business is going to be disrupted in the next 10 years, but they're going to be retiring in 3, do they want their legacy to be, they did a whole shakeup and left it a mess, even though the intention was the right thing, right? So there are all these little compromises, and it's hard. I do think that we're living in a sick care society and a sick care system.
Yep.
The doctors are, I was actually at an event the other day in San Francisco, and they were talking about wellness, and they asked this group of Silicon Valley people, how many of you have a GP? Nobody. 150 people, no one raised their hands. And the thing is, like, you go to the GP, you say, I don't feel well, and they will remember, okay, I learned this in a book, I'm narrowing it down, I'm going to give you a medication. It is not about, let's figure out why you're feeling this, the root cause, and make sure that it doesn't happen again versus, well, take this thing that actually might have, an additional effect on you that you're not even aware of. And so the doctors aren't even really incentivized to think critically. I wish that if I, knock on wood, end up in the hospital, I have a team like they demonstrate in the house that are challenging each other's assumptions and really looking through historical references and records and trying to get to the bottom of it. But it doesn't work that way right now.
No, we call it, we want you to feel better, not get better, right? And they do it with, that's not what we want, but that's the way the system is set up, yeah? Is mask the symptom so that you feel better without addressing the underlying root cause of what's causing the symptom or to manifest in the first place. And that's the sick care model. And I think it's interesting because I'm talking more and more people are waking up to this, right? They're waking up to, because when I was growing up, and even not too long ago, if a guy walked in a room in a white lab coat with a stethoscope around his neck and his name in cursive that had doctor in front of it, and he told me to jump on one leg and turn in circles, he went to med school. He knows what he's talking about. That's what I'm going to do. And I say this not to cast a bad light on doctors, right? And the nobility of their profession and what they're trying to do. But to your point, it's the system that they've been educated in.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
it is not a personal.
They're doing their level best, and
they are.
And we do these silos. Have you and I talked about this whole longevity CEO idea? Did I share that with you a little bit? And just,
CEO
it's funny.
Of your own health.
Yeah, the CEO of your own health. And I shared this with like some, business peer-to-peer networking groups, right? Where I've had a chance to speak in front of them. And I thought, how can I get their attention in a way that will be more relatable to them? And I said, so just imagine we're the CEO of our business. Our job is to create a vision and then to put a strategy together, right? Assemble a team to build a plan to execute around that strategy and then monitor the data, market intel and KPIs and all these things to see how well our plan and our strategy is working. And are we on track to achieve our vision, right? That's our jobs. Imagine we outsource that role to a consultant that we talk to a couple of times a year and they give us some sort of Band-Aid, not a systemic fix to whatever problems occur in the business. And it's always in the rear view. The business isn't going to thrive. It's not going to do very well. And then compound it with our CFO, COO, and CEO don't speak to each other. They silo information. And so we're not sharing the knowledge of the main systems of the business. Again, the business is not going to be a success. It's going to fail and fail spectacularly. Yet that's exactly what we do with our health. We outsource our health to a consultant that we call doctor. We have maybe multiple different things going on. They're not really sharing information. And we don't take this agency or this ownership over our own health and wellness and longevity, if you will. And when you start speaking in those terms, just like, do you know these 5 basic numbers about your own health? And people are shaking their heads. These are numbers that are so easy to get now because accessibility to labs and testing and diagnostic tools, even wearables and things, are so much more prevalent and pervasive that you can get some data. Now, what do you do with it? How do you make sense of it? And how do you take meaningful action to create meaningful change? That's different, right? And that's where this team needs, like you said, this team, a la house, comes together. And I always say, as you're assembling a team, maybe I need a functional nutritionist. Maybe I need an exercise coach. Maybe I need a breath work or a mindfulness coach. Maybe I need, a guy who's specializing in the immune system because I have some sort of autoimmune condition. But I need a team together and I need them talking. I need them sharing information because we're going to treat this thing as a whole. And I think that's where we're starting to see a little bit of a crack in the door and a shift to people understanding this idea and this notion. And I think that's where I'm encouraged by it, but it has to start there.
One add-on analogy, what you just described is kind of similar to these biological aging tests, right? You get one of them, it might be for one specific organ or one specific function, and it's not tied to everything else. And they're working on it, right? But it's not yet a perfect representation.
It's not.
But at the same time, that doesn't mean that people shouldn't start using these capabilities because the more they're used, the more data there is, the better informed the teams are for advanced development. So it's just kind of the process, right? And I guess that also gets into democratization and accessibility, which is one of the massive misconceptions, that it's only going to be available to the rich. And the thing is, we're really not sure what's going to happen. Just like saying, well, what am I going to do if I live till 140? Well, your mindset could change tomorrow. Your mindset today is not the same as it was 3 days ago, and you have no idea what you're going to think in 3 years, let alone 20. It's kind of the similar consideration. And so what we do know, though, is there's Moore's law and there's a curve. And basically, technology enhances over time, and the cost, the price point drops accordingly with additional computing power and that pattern. And so if you think about it, what's one thing that was extremely expensive 15 years ago and is not so much today? Lots of things. When you first got the iPhone, or when you first had a phone that had touchscreen, I remember I didn't want to get it because it had glitches. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to let them work out the kinks. How do you work out the kinks? By having people who are early adopters, who are excited and want to see the latest, buy it, use it, do 360 reviews. And, that is kind of the nature of progress and improvement. And so the thing is, like we said, the biological aging tests are not there yet. The diagnostic tests, even on their own, you still have to consider the data aggregation and the capabilities to even analyze it, which also, how do you take into account that they might be biased and AI? So there's so many components, and I'm not trying to discourage anybody by saying this is complicated, but with the mission statement of our organization, the new one, Lifespan Research Institute, part of it is specifically ensure widespread distribution and accessibility to therapeutics that are designed to target age-related diseases and the suffering associated with it. And so there's Web3 initiatives. It's just kind of the process and thinking strategically about, well, what do we need to do on this trajectory to ensure that it will follow the same path as most other technological innovations.
Yeah, I think that's important. There's also subjectivity in some of those tests, right? Because when you do a biological age test, you fill out, a subjective questionnaire, at least the ones, around DNA methylation. How do you sleep? How do you eat? Do you drink? Do you smoke? You answer, and not everyone is completely honest on the way they answer those tests. If for example, do you drink? Yes. How many drinks do you have per week? 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7 or more, right? Everybody's checking the middle bubble if they're, and so there's subjectivity in those subjective questionnaires related to the objective results that come out of that testing. And all of that is thrown into the algorithm and the way that, they put us in these groups, by age and socioeconomic status, and the way we've all answered these questions and calculate this biological age based on the objective data from DNA methylation. But there's room for interpretation and error in there as well. And I think that's speaking to the heart. Something I wanted to bring up, and I think I just sort of glaringly maybe glossed over this or didn't even address it, is there's a crisis. I like to call it the aging crisis. And this is what I mean. And it's the work that you're doing in organizations like yours, but really with where your focus is, there's a sense of urgency. And it's because 1 in 6 people by 2030 in this country, in the US, will be over the age of 60. And that percentage of the population over that in that age demographic hasn't happened before. And by 2050, 2.1 billion people will be over the age of 60. And the reason I call it a crisis or created a sense of urgency is as we age, we know that our healthcare needs become more complex. If you look at your father, for example, as he was getting older with cardiovascular disease and age-related disease, we know they become more complex. So we're going to put a bigger burden on the financial resources, a bigger burden on the healthcare resources, a bigger burden on the family units for caretakers. Because when you have that percentage of the population becoming as large as it's going to be in just a few short years, I mean, we're talking 5 or 6 years from now, it's a problem to solve. And the way I look at it, and I would love your thoughts on this, we have to help people age better right now. Like that's, to me, it's task number one. It's priority number one is we have to help people age with grace and vitality, or better youthful function, or just, less susceptibility to some of these age-related chronic disease. And that's stuff that's going to really be addressed in lifestyle, right? And we can take advantage of a lot of the new technology and the emerging stuff. And to your point, the more we're piling data into, whether it's an Aura Ring wearable, or it's taking your labs, or it's doing biological age tests, data is the currency of the realm when it comes to this, to the advancement of science and innovation in here. But I do think that the way I like to think about it is we need to help people age better so that those last 10, 15 years are not spent suffering from chronic age-related disease. Thoughts?
So as you were speaking, I was looking at notes that I took from a call yesterday. There was a recent project. I don't know if it's even public yet, but apparently there was an initiative to develop an econometric model of the United States where policy models can plug in and understand the aging economy. So there are partnerships with massive universities and well-known organizations. And the purpose was to show policymakers and pharma the opportunity space and engage serious economists and mathematicians to think, what would the effect on the United States economy be if X or if Y? So there are interesting initiatives happening there, because I believe the last publication about the longevity economy is a bit outdated and there hasn't really been a strong publication since. But you can already see, even without economic models, that the clinics like your own are popping up and people are making different decisions about where they spend their money and what they prioritize in terms of the services they want. Longevity clinics are still iterating, but it is a different approach, and people are not going to GPs. So if you think about it, and if the hospitals or the doctors have, business models that rely on a certain number of patients doing a certain number of things, and all of a sudden there's kind of an exodus, right? There's implications there to consider. And also, as you mentioned, the age range of these people as well. So if there's a specific question, tell me, but that's what I have to add for the moment.
Yeah, no, I think we're just in a discussion, right? And to your point, that's a big economic driver in our economy in the US and globally, quite frankly, is the scenario you just described. If there are fewer people going into the sick care environment in hospitals in later stage part of their lives, that creates an economic disruption in a massive part of our economy, in our industry. Yet at the same time, and I can't cite data here, I've been reading a little bit about it. The number of people getting into that plus 60 age category, and it's such a percentage of the population, you think about it, entering assisted living facilities, nursing homes, hospitals, moving in with loved ones, for, if they become not able to live on their own. It's a big number, and they're saying we're not equipped for it. We're not ready to handle this, in terms of, the scale and the volume. So if we start helping people age more gracefully and push that out a little bit, I don't know what the economic or the potential impact is of that, but it makes you think a little bit about, first things first. I think we're all in agreement that we all would love to age with good health, right? We can all say that. And I love how you framed it today with being just really straight down the middle of, this is how you have to think about it. And this is what the system and the circle is today, but what's outside it. That's how we start to move the needle in a meaningful way, and rather than just talking about it in organizations like yours. So
yeah, two thoughts that came up. What is the pharma model, right? People are sick, pharma develops drugs, they give them to the patients, maybe they get better, maybe they need something else. But the idea is they stay alive because they sell drugs, right? But if there are, first of all, I don't think there's going to be a one thing that's going to solve aging at all. It's going to be a mixture
100%.
of all sorts of things: lifestyle, wellness, therapeutics, you name it.
Yep.
But the thing is that pharmas are not incentivized for a healthcare model where everyone's healthy. Okay, so that's one thing to think about. And I'm not poo-pooing it. It is a capitalistic mindset. It's if you don't know, you don't know. You might be stuck in it, and that's understandable. The other thing I would say that's interesting is I was in Asia and I gave a talk in front of a bunch of government representatives, and I framed longevity as our next and ultimate arms race, right? Because what this really means is that we increase the amount of time we have, healthy time, and that doesn't have a dollar sign attached to it. It's absolutely priceless.
Yeah.
And from a political perspective, everyone is incentivized by power, right? If you have time. So this is it, right? This is not, it is the, whoever is going to be the leader in longevity is going to have the most geopolitical power.
That's interesting. No, I like it. And make a quick asterisk on the big pharma stuff. Look, there's been some incredible breakthroughs and some incredible drugs and advancements that have come out of the pharmaceutical model. So I'm always careful not to poo-poo that. But
absolutely, totally agree. Just for the sake of this particular conversation,
100%. No, listen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true,
it's not
right?
black
I mean,
and white.
because you don't want to. It's easy to jump on that wagon and bash, and all that stuff. And I want to acknowledge that there's been incredible and
100%.
at great expense, at great cost, right? To help people. But as a primary way of addressing aging and or in our health as we start to age, we need to focus more on root cause instead of just masking those symptoms. And I think that's the takeaway. That's the point, right? And there are some things that are certainly going to help that have come out of pharmaceutical, but they're not coming to save us, and they're not going to have the big breakthrough, in my opinion, in terms of helping us age with grace and vitality.
For what it's worth, there are a lot of aspects of the two organizations, SENS Research and Lifespan, that are merging that I didn't mention. Some of the success stories. So one of them, for example, is that one of the students that we had going through the education program was working with one of the PIs, and basically they came up with this amazing discovery, and we've spun it out into a proper for-profit startup. SENS, or the new organization, has equity in it. But basically, they're about to go into clinical trials for a completely new class of medication with a damage repair approach for heart disease. Right? I have colleagues that are confident that some of our scientific leaders can actually save their parents. So the idea here is that stuff is happening. It is very challenging. To go through clinical trials, you need tens and tens of millions of dollars back to back to back. And sometimes, these clinical trials are actually probably happening in New Zealand or Australia because
Yep.
the FDA, it's like fitting a round peg into a square. That's the challenge here. And it's a different approach, right? In order to be classified as a disease, you have to have a specific indication. But if the indication is aging process, then that gets convoluted. So
Yeah.
I think, things are going to change, but there are companies that are going to clinical trials. BioAge is going into an IPO. And I think what's most interesting about that is that now the world is going to look at the rest of their portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of their portfolio is everything that the longevity field stands for. And that goes back to amplification. Remember that C. elegans worm,
Yep.
that organism? People didn't know about the others just because of the lack of amplification. However, the idea behind Lifespan.io was to amplify these scientific achievements. I mean, we did a deal with Chris Hemsworth. So the millions of fans that he has who are interested in fitness and wellness get, qualified education and exposure to what's happening in the longevity field in a very strategic way. So the reason why it's really important, especially for all these listeners, is that advocacy comes in many forms, and just challenging your own assumptions and getting curious is the first step, and that is not negligible.
No, 100%. Stephanie, if people want to learn more about the new organization, Lifespan Research Foundation, did I get that Did I nail that?
Institute, yeah, LRI, Lifespan Research Institute. It's all good.
Lifespan
We're going to put some
Research
branding out.
Institute. If people want to learn more about Lifespan Research Institute, where do they go?
Okay, so you can either go to SENS, SENS.org, or lifespan.io, either one of them, and there's press releases that will lead you to a landing page for the new site. The new site, which will be extremely comprehensive, because again, there's 25 years between these two companies of data and learnings. It will be a whole new launch, so all of that will come soon. And beyond that, if you're an interested investor, ask us about our investor network. That information's up there. If you are a student that wants that education, come on in. If you want to donate and support research, we have an entire laundry list of qualified projects. And, some of them are for Parkinson's, some of them are for heart disease. They're for all different kinds of things. If you want to come take a tour of our 11,000 square foot research facility, which now we're calling a research and education center in Silicon Valley, you can meet the scientists and see all of our state-of-the-art equipment. We are positioned to really enable more progress. And the other thing that I would like to say that I kind of alluded to earlier is that this is just the beginning, right? This is just the kind of amalgamation of the two organizations and the baseline. There are initiatives that we're talking about that would enable us to kind of be the IRB approver or the standard. So if you're not sure if a supplement is working and we create a mechanism, a stamp of approval to be able to measure efficacy, that changes the game. Because right now, all you have is you either do a drug and you go through clinical trials in the FDA process and millions of dollars, or you go the supplement route. And we don't necessarily have all the diagnostic tools yet. And so we need something in between. And so we would like to act as what we are, which is we serve the industry and we give out that information for better decision making. But it's about being a trustworthy source and understanding what our incentives are. And as a nonprofit, it's the mission, it's not revenue. But we do have to keep our lights on in order to continue doing this work. So we would really appreciate all the support that you can possibly offer. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. Feel free to reach out to me. The contact information is online. And Greg, I really appreciate you even offering me the opportunity to mention this on your podcast.
I knew this was going to be great, and you delivered. I had I was super excited when you said yes, and we found time because I know how busy you are. You're all over the place and traveling. So for us to have lockdown time and to spend this together, I think this has been fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you too. And I know that it's a hard conversation for everyone to listen to, and there's still so many unknowns, but that's also the beauty and excitement of it, right? You don't know what you don't know, and amazing things come of it as long as, you don't fall back into kind of like a narrowed mindset, right?
Be curious.
My LinkedIn tagline is reimagining what's possible with converging technologies. And there are always going to be pros and cons to new innovations. And it's just about the passion and about the intention and working together. And I see a bright future for all of us. This is just the beginning.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. So we stop.